Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales, returning for part 2 of our introduction to Mexican drug trafficking organizations. Much of the material in these videos were taken from my book, How We Lost the Drug War and How We Can Win It Back. If you recall last time, we talked a little bit about the history of drug use on humankind and how drug laws evolved here in the United States. In order to understand drug trafficking in Mexico, you have to understand that there was a major revolution almost 100 years ago. This involved many different individuals, politicians, generals, and bandidos. One of them was Emiliano Zapata, who was a general in the South, and another one was Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa was the main alias for Doroteo Arango Arambula, a general in the Mexican Revolution in the early 1900s. Villa became a bandit as a young man of the state of Durango while growing up. In 1902, the Rurales, the rural police force of the Mexican president Porfirio Diaz, arrested Villa for stealing mules and for assault. Due to his connections with local political boss Pablo Valenzuela, who was allegedly a recipient of stolen goods by Villa, Doroteo Arango Arumbula spared the death sentence. He was then forcibly inducted into the federal army, but several months later he deserted and fled into the neighboring state of Chihuahua. In 1903, after killing an army officer and stealing his horse, Doroteo became known throughout Mexico by his new alias, Francisco Pancho Villa. At the outbreak of the Mexican Revolution in 1910, Villa was only 32 years old. He eventually became commander of the División del Norte, the Division of the North, and he gained further notoriety and recruited and forced young men and even elderly ones to join his military campaign. In fact, my great-grandfather immigrated into the United States because his family feared that Villa would forcibly make him join his army. It was said while Villa liked to fancy himself on a horse in pictures, he actually drove many times from place to place in a Model T Ford, moving counterfeit and illegal goods, including drugs and alcohol, to support his war efforts. The vehicle would often backfire and was named La Cucaracha, a roach. Songwriters at the time penned a story or a corrido for Villa's car. La cucaracha, ya no puedo caminar, porque no tiene por qué le pasa, marihuana que fumar. Villa resumed his life as a bandit and led a raid against a small New Mexico U.S.-Mexican border town, resulting in the Battle of Columbus in 1916, and retreated quickly back into Mexico to escape U.S. retaliation. The U.S. government sent U.S. Army General John J. Pershing on a long expedition to capture him, but Villa continued to evade his attackers with guerrilla tactics during an unsuccessful 9-month incursion by American forces into Mexican sovereign territory. The mission ended when the U.S. entered World War I and Pershing was recalled to other duties. Villa died by assassination, likely with the approval of Mexican President Alvaro Obregón, while driving his 1919 Dodge touring car on July 20th, 1923, in the city of Parral in Chihuahua, Mexico. Before his death, he was quoted as saying, "I am not an educated man. I never had an opportunity to learn anything except how to fight." Juan Nepomuceno Guerra Cárdenas was a Mexican crime lord, bootlegger, businessman, and smuggler born in 1915 during Villa's heyday. He founded a pre-Gulf cartel, and he is often considered the godfather of modern Mexican drug smuggling concepts. Guerra Cárdenas began smuggling alcohol during Prohibition from Mexico into the United States. After Prohibition was lifted in 1933, he diversified to other cross-border activities like drug smuggling. Through his political connections, Guerra Cárdenas was able to control much of the contraband moving across the Rio Grande River Mexican border into the state of Texas. He died in 2001 and during his whole life never spent more than a few hours in a jail cell. Many drug traffickers today pay homage to Guerra Cárdenas as well as to Jesus Malverde, who is said to be a drug lord like Guerra Cárdenas and was sort of a Robin Hood figure who stole from the rich and gave to the poor, and also to La Santa Muerte, as this expert explains. So then let's talk a little bit more about the narco cultura, Santa Muerte, and Jesus Malverde and all that. What can you tell us about that role?
Yeah, well, the bottom line is cartels and gangs working with the cartel. The bottom line, they pray for protection. They pray for protection against law enforcement. And they've been doing that for years and years. I remember being a narcotic detective in the 1980s. and encountering altars and shrines and things of that nature. Although that has evolved quite a bit also. Back in those days, I would encounter, or we would encounter, the altars had what I call legitimate things, such as statues of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and a lot of saints or santos. There was no Santa Muerte back then, not even Jesus Malverde yet. He came a little bit later, but he wasn't around. So now it's evolved to now you have Jesus Malverde, who is the original narco saint, who, by the way, did not originate as a narco saint. And then we have Santa Muerte, who had become extremely popular. And actually, she's the one that concerns me the most because she's very easily associated with death. And in my class, I talk about cartel-related murders and sacrifices to Santa Muerte that have occurred in Mexico, but also here in the United States. A lot of officers and people are not aware of that. And I discussed those incidents in my training. Getting back to that shrine, working as a narcotics detective, I remember looking behind a statue of Jesus Christ, and I find a baggie full of balloons of heroin. And then I told her, well, you're under arrest. And I said, why did you have the heroin behind Jesus? And she looked at me and she said, well, he was supposed to protect me from you. And then, I said, well, it didn't work. And then her response was, and I'll never forget her response. Her response was this. She goes, yeah, I guess I need to pray harder. Wow. So that told me then was that, the belief in this is unconditional. It's embedded in their heart, their soul, and their mind. She's going to jail. I got her heroin, and she still says, I need to pray harder. So now it's evolved to where they're adding a lot of different things, although they still pray to Jesus Christ and the different saints. Very often they add Santa Muerte and Jesus Malverde. Jesus Malverde was the original narco saint who did not originate as narco saint. I don't believe that he even existed, to be honest with you. But my opinion doesn't matter to the people that do believe in him. They believe he was a bandit in the early 1900s in Culiacan, Sinaloa. He would hide in the green brush, wearing green camouflage, jump out, rob his victim. Whatever he got from them, he gave to the poor people. Okay, so the government caught up to him. They hung him from a tree. It was a public hanging. And all the poor people distraught. Their hero was dead. And the people started talking among themselves, saying, he was our hero and he died helping the poor people. Truly now he must be the angel of the poor. That's his original title. And that's very important because there are people in Mexico, even here in the United States, that pray to Jesus Malverde, not as a drug saint, but as the angel of the poor.
We will continue discussing this subject in our next videos as we cover all of the major Mexican drug cartels and lesser organizations and get more in depth into individual cartels as well as major players in these vast criminal organizations and examine closer how the war on drugs has impacted us all. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off, Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.